second plenary. I'm not used to introduce people who do not need to be introduced, and this is the first time for me. We have the pleasure and the honor of having Louis Schweitzer with us today. It was the former CEO of Renault between 1992 and 2005. I think that we all know how that period was remarkable for the French group. It was initially, basically, a French-based, European-based, nationalized car maker. It became, at the end of the period, a very internationalized, private, profitable, and growing car maker. There are many remarkable achievements that have been made during that period. I have two in mind in particular. The alliance with Nissan, when in 1999 Renault came to rescue Nissan. Very few thought that Nissan was rescuable, first, and even fewer thought that Renault, a smaller European car maker, could make it. And we can say now that the Nissan alliance has been one of the most successful alliances ever in the history of the automotive industry. And a second achievement, I think, that was very important for the Renault group is that during the same period of time, Renault bought, I think, the worst by reputation post-Soviet car maker, which was Dacia in Romania.
$50 million, it was not expensive.
It was very cheap. But many people wondered what Renault was going to do with that group. And now it's a global, a very profitable and successful brand. It represents over almost 50% of the total sales of the Renault group. And Logan has become kind of a big success story in the industry. So you can see how much visionary Monsieur Schweitzer was at the time. And I think that is the time now that we need vision as well in order to look into the future. So I'm really happy that Mr. Schweitzer can share with us his vision of the future of the automotive industry. Please let us welcome Mr. Schweitzer.
Well, good day to all of you, and I greet you. I'm very flattered to be here. I must tell you, my notes were prepared in French. I will speak in English, and therefore you must accept some translation time from my part during my speech. First, let's speak of history. I believe that in the history of the car industry, there have been two revolutions, and for the last century, only evolution. But I also believe that we are facing a new revolution. And I think that to look back is probably not the only way, but certainly the best way to look at the future. My experience is that it is difficult to predict the future, but I believe that long-term trends are interesting. So, let's go back to history. First revolution, of course, is the invention of the car, 1886, one by Mr. Daimler, one by Mr. Benz, fully functional, and the product, this was a product invention, had all the characteristics of a present car. Gasoline engine, a driving system, brakes, seats, wheels, a platform. Nothing has fundamentally changed since 1886. But in 1900, you had thousands of independent small manufacturers, and one may note that in 1900, France was the world leader in production. Time has long gone by. Second revolution was a process revolution, not a product revolution. That was the Ford T in 1908. And the Ford T transformed the car from a luxury product for the happy few to a mass product for everybody. It was a car for everybody. And it gave everybody the ability to go where I want, when I want, at any time. And this, I believe, changed society and made the car an instrument of freedom. Then Since the 20s, we had a number of major evolutions. The first one was engineered by Sloan at General Motors, Alfred P. Sloan, I believe the greatest manager in the history of the automotive industry. Alfred P. Sloan invented marketing. And it was not the car for everybody, it was the car for each person. And from this date on, you had two different types of buyers of car. The rational type, who bought the Ford T. The Ford T lived on for 20 or 30 years. And the passionate of the automotive industry. And we still have these two groups. My introducer kindly spoke of Dacia and Logan. They're the rational group. The buyer of a Mercedes, of an Audi, of almost all the other brands, is part of the passionate group. He buys an automobile able to do 250 kilometers per hour, having 500 horsepower, which he will never use as long as he owns this car. So from this major evolution by Sloan, you have still two different groups of customers who are still alive. And I must say the passionate group is the most important of both. Passion can, of course, include status symbol. The car clothing was for many years, up to the invention of the car, the status symbol. The car today, for most car owners, is still a status symbol. That was the first major evolution. The second, of course, evolution was continuous technical progress. I was recently asked in a meeting, what major inventions the automotive industry produced? And I thought for a while, and I didn't find any. And since 1886, of course. And I found this quite interesting. Automotive industry has integrated in its product all technical progress, all technical evolutions which have happened during the past century. And it has brought to these technologies two major elements. One was bringing the cost down. The second was ensuring reliability and durability. The aerospace industry has brought many inventions. NASA is a case in point. There are others. But of course, their price is not an issue. And durability is not an issue. Reliability, hopefully, is an issue. But durability is not an issue. And if you look at the automotive industry, cars are driven by amateurs, not professionals, and that's quite different from an airplane. You mean a car has to be able to be driven by somebody starting the engine, knowing nothing about the car he's driving, nothing about its functions, just knowing where the steering wheel is, brake, hopefully, and the gas pedal also. And it's used in an environment which is much harsher, for example, than the environment a plane lives in or a ship lives in. So all these technical evolutions, all these scientific progress were
maintenance in a retail network. So how will they live? And when you will have mobility as a service operator that will buy fleet and operate the fleet, transform product into service, there is no more B2C retail network. It's B2B. Okay. So how do you integrate
okay.
this?
First, I very much defended when I said the only lobbying I really put my heart in was defending our retail network. So I'm a strong believer in this. And the retail network has vastly improved in efficiency, vastly reduced in numbers. That's a fact. It's quite specific because few other products need as much space as a car to see, and as a car is expensive, most people want to see it before they buy it. I mean, they want to test it to see it because it's so expensive. Okay, second point, the retail network works because the margins of the retail network are very small on new cars. I mean, it's a normal retail margin is 30 to 50%. The real margin on new cars of our retail network is 2 to 5. So for competitors, it's not so easy because the margins are so small. Of course, they make money, as you mentioned, on service and space safe and parts. That's where they have the margins, which enables them to sell the new cars. And this is endangered, as you mentioned. So therefore, there is a risk. And you underline a point which I did not mention, which is that a major element of the strength of the OEMs is their control of the networks, because they can push some cars, manage customer demand through this network. So, yes, I believe that the retail network role today is essential, that they will be less of a support for objective reasons for OEMs in the future, and thus will be one more challenge for the OEMs. I don't know how they will address it, but it will be one more challenge. One already sees that the real retail networks, having consolidated, have much more power. The balance of power between OEMs and concessionaires has changed significantly over the last 20 to 30 years, not in favor of the OEMs. So, one more reason for anxiety.
A very funny question.
Yes, you are a believer, a strong believer of electrical vehicle to reduce emission in the car industry. However, in the press, we could learn that Toyota, the leader in terms of selling cars, are investing massively to develop hydrogen. Could you share with us how do you understand this?
Well, let's say, as a way to address urban pollution, hydrogen is perfectly efficient. I believe, but as I mentioned, this is a personal belief, that the improvement in batteries and the fact that one does not see in a visible future an improvement in the efficiency, energetic efficiency of the creation of hydrogen will lead to electricity overtaking hydrogen. So I believe, that Toyota will take a more balanced approach, I would say. But it is a part of the role of a car manufacturer to try things and to accept to have done mistaken choices. I mean, one of the advantages of being a large manufacturer is that you can afford a mistake. If Toyota loses 2 billion or 3 billion or 4 billion on hydrogen, Toyota will survive. Renault-Nissan, I believe, invested too early in electric vehicles. I mean, I have said I believe in the future of electricity. Adapted to lower costs, ensure reliability, durability. And, of course, they concern engines which are more powerful, have better efficiency, they called new materials, electronic, digital technologies and so forth, which enabled the car to be more comfortable, more safe, and to be connected. And this was the second major evolution, and it's going on. The third evolution was emerging countries. When I was at the head of Renault, you sold 60 to 70 million cars per year. I explained to my shareholders that the car industry was a growth industry because 80% of the cars were sold to 20% of the world's population in countries representing about 20% of the world's population. And nobody believed me. And I looked back recently on forecasts for sales in China, India, and forecasts made in 2005 for 2015, the high-end forecast was 4 or 5 times lower than what we saw effectively. And now the car industry is going at the rate of about 100 million a year. So a rapid, unexpected growth. Predictable, but not expected. And if we go on this way, the whole worldwide car fleet will go from 1 billion, its present stage, to 3 to 5 billion if all over the world people behave like Europeans or Americans today. 5 billion if they behave like Americans, 3 billion if they behave like Europeans. Now, this is clearly, in my view, unsustainable for the planet. And I will, and this will be the second part of my presentation, say a few words about what I see as the major problems of the car industry. I think there are 4 of them. First, of course, is safety. Not for the people within the car, but for people who happen to be on the road. As you know, there are about 1 million to 1.5 million deaths per year, which means that since World War II, more people have died from car accident or automotive accident than people died during World War II. And some predictions say this will go up to 2 million. Now, there has been widespread acceptance for automotive deaths, but I believe this acceptance is disappearing, and for only ethical reasons, this level of death rate, not speaking of maiming, accidents, permanent disabilities, is unacceptable. Second issue is local pollution, particulate matter, NOx, and so forth and so forth. And this is something the car manufacturers have not understood. I mean, they believed they were improving the emissions of their cars every 5 years, step by step, and therefore continuous progress would solve the problem. The fact is, yes, there was continuous progress. I'm not speaking of the diesel issue, Dieselgate issues, which is an epiphenomenon, but tolerance vis-à-vis local pollution diminished faster than emissions diminished. And therefore, local pollution has become a major issue. I think it's an issue which technically can be solved. But let's say in broad, my feeling is that acceptance for the automobile is today mostly related to this local pollution emissions issue, even more than to road safety, which I mentioned first. Third issue is, of course, greenhouse gases. Now, people tend to confuse greenhouse gases and local pollution. And it's very hard to explain that CO2 is not a pollutant, while CO is a pollutant. But this is the case, but batteries are still a major issue. And when Renault Nissan decided, I did not approve at the time, to invest massively in electrical vehicles, I thought it was too early, and they had write-offs in the billions. So, yes, you cannot hit the nail right on the head all the time. It would be too easy.
Well, I propose to thank you, Monsieur Louis Schweitzer, for this great conference.
And both have been packaged, if I may say so, in one. That is greenhouse gas emissions and pollutants, which probably is not all bad. But it means that greenhouse gas emissions, which is a problem that the present automotive industry does not know how to solve, has become a major issue. And as you know, the automotive industry represents about 15%, give or take, of total greenhouse gas emissions. Last issue is bottlenecks, traffic in cities, with two aspects. One is probably that in the US, the car has destroyed inner cities. In Europe today, we see that the fact that people are afraid that the car will destroy inner cities to the advantage of suburbs is today a major issue. And I would say the only conclusion is that the privately owned car does not have enough space to live in inner cities, be they very large or very small. So these are, in my views, four major issues that the car industry has to face. Now, finally, a bit late, coming to the issue of the future. But I think the introduction was probably useful to put things into perspective. There's still one evolution coming, that is the powertrain, and the usage of cars, and one revolution, the autonomous vehicle. Let's speak first of the two evolutions which are about to happen because they are today, on a volume scale, not very significant. The first is a powertrain. Let's say bluntly, I'm not a great believer in hydrogen. I believe that hydrogen today is not an efficient way to transform electricity into driving power. Maybe there will be breakthrough, that is, organic ways to produce hydrogen. But I have not heard of any scientific breakthrough making this probable in the 10 to 20 years to come. So I'm not a believer in fuel cell hydrogen powered car. I know they exist, they work, but I think they are, let's say, today a solution to urban pollution. They are not a solution to CO2, greenhouse gas emissions, and I believe they are not efficient. Of course, then, the evolution in powertrains is the electric car. Now, the electric car is nothing new. As you all know, the first car which passed 100 kilometers per hour was electric, and that was more than a century ago. So, and let's say electric engines are something very traditional, and progress has been relatively slow. So the engine is not everything. But batteries is a field where progress is incredibly fast. It's quite striking from the automotive point of view because for decades, automotive batteries were traditional, heavy lead machines, and there was no evolution for, as I said, decades. But the pressure of smartphones, electronic equipment, led to an incredibly fast progress in cars, in batteries. And the fact that people today see an evolution toward electric cars means that we see today an incredibly fast progress in batteries. Of course, specific power is one, which means autonomy. I think a real autonomy of 500 kilometers is within reach. I mean, some manufacturers already say they have 500 kilometers, but not with an amateur driver driving under normal conditions. There we are around 200 kilometers, which is still small. So, autonomy, number of cycles a battery can accept. I understand from experts, I'm not an engineer, that 20 to 30,000 cycles seem an attainable goal within 5 to 10 years, which means that the battery will live a bit longer than the car, which is an enormous progress. I mean, if you have to change your battery in a car, it's an enormous expense, and therefore it's quite discouraging. But if the battery lives longer than the car, it means that the recycling process, which is already well managed for cars, will also be well managed for batteries, and that the cost of batteries will be reduced. I mean, if you increase the number of cycles by a factor of 10 to 100, it means the cost of the battery in use diminishes by a factor of 10 to 100. And it means that electric-driven cars will become effectively really competitive vis-à-vis gasoline or diesel cars. And so, yes, I believe that the powertrain evolution is underway. There, people believed it would happen earlier. I remember I made a bet 8 years ago with a proponent of electric cars who told me we bet a car, so a significant amount. And he told me that by 2020, Renault would manufacture only electric cars. I believe, already once at best. And unfortunately, the startup which this man had developed, which was not anymore a startup, went bankrupt, and therefore I will not collect. Too bad for me. Second evolution, which is happening now, has not yet happened significantly, is the collective use of cars. BlaBlaCar, shared car, etc., etc. Why is this happening so slowly? I mean, everybody believes and says that it's stupid to have one person within a car, which weighs 1.5 tons and represents around 5 to 10 square meters on the road. The answer is that all sociological studies show that the car is seen as an extension of the home. And you do not invite in your home people you do not know. Most people don't. Some people do, but most people don't. Therefore, the shared use of a car is not natural for the owner of a car. I think this will change, but it changes in a slower fashion than what was expected. And now I come to the real revolution, the autonomous vehicle. Of course, you all know the 1 to 5 scale I will use to gauge autonomous vehicle. Today we have on the road 1, 2, 3. And the issue is, when will we have 5 fully autonomous on all infrastructures, all roads and paths? I remember also some years ago, let's say 4 or 5 years, people told me 2021 you will be able to buy a fully autonomous vehicle. I said, I don't believe that. And I recently was chairing a group of experts, I will come back to it, on the autonomous vehicle. And one of the experts told me the 5 level fully autonomous will never happen. Not in 50 years. I don't believe that either. I believe it will happen, and I believe, I don't know if it will take 10 years, 15 years, I'm not quite sure. But I believe that the 5 level will happen, and it will be the third major revolution in the history of the car and the automotive industry. I have, on the transition period, a few comments. One, I don't believe that the so-called level 3, when the car drives itself, but the driver should be ready at all times to intervene, is reasonable or feasible long term. I believe it cannot work. And I'll bring you an anecdote. You all know of, how you say in English, when you set the speed and the car keeps the speed. Yeah. We installed it in France on our cars, Renault. And it was technically perfectly reliable. And we had a number of incidents where our cars crashed toll barriers and we could not understand why. We took the cars back, we looked into everything, they were perfect. And our people could not understand why this happened. And then one of our test drivers, by accident, uncovered the story. As you know, in the US, where this has existed, cruise control has existed for decades, you have only automatic gearboxes, which means you have 2 pedals, gas pedal, brake. And you cannot confuse those 2 pedals. The feel is different, the place is different, everything is different. When we installed it in Europe, we installed it on cars with manual gearbox, which means you have 3 pedals. And when a people was in cruise control mode, they crossed their legs under the seat, which is what you do. Why would you keep your foot on the pedal when it's not needed? And then, you know, they spoke, they saw the barrier, and whoop, they shot their foot forward. Okay. but they did not go on the brake pedal, but on the pedal just beside it, which is the débrayage, the clutch. And of course, the cruise control switched off. But in this situation, the car goes on for a kilometer or so. And they crash the barrier. And the lesson is the act of taking back the control of a car when it is not pre-decided in advance is something very dangerous and uncontrollable. And even in airplane accidents, a number of recent airplane accidents happened when the pilots tried to take back the control from the automatic pilot. Therefore, I do not believe, not underlined 3 times, that the so-called 3-level is an acceptable solution. 4-level is more reasonable. But I believe that as long as you have 4-level, you have this risk of somebody taking back the controls in a dangerous situation, because you still have these pedals, the steering wheels, the temptation to use them, and if you're surprised by something, a truck passing, a car speeding by, somebody braking in front of you, most people will react by trying to take back the controls. Airline pilots do, mistakenly some cases, and I believe drivers will do it too, and this will cause accidents, and the responsibility for accidents will be a difficult issue to address. Last point I will make before addressing what I believe one should do to prepare for this revolution is the safety issue. One hears that human errors causes about 90% of accident. I believe strongly if autonomous vehicles have 10 times less accidents than manually driven vehicles, that is not good enough. I believe the acceptance, the social acceptance for, let's say in France, 340 deaths caused by autonomous vehicles, that is 10% of the present death rate, would be completely unacceptable. And it would be unacceptable in every country, developed country of the world. So the safety issue should not be reducing by a factor 10 the rate of accident. It should be much higher. Okay, so what should we do? Yeah, I'm still on. I will finish on time. The first thing, which is not natural to our automotive industry, is having a long-term vision. And not only a vision, but using this long-term vision to manage the company. And there I will take an example coming from America. The American industry in the 50s and the 60s was so successful that it did not give a damn to technical progress. It did not give a damn about efficiency of driving, fuel consumption. It thought about marketing, bodywork, air conditioning, everything which the customers liked immediately, and so that people would change their car every 1, 2, or 3 years to get the latest model. And therefore, when the energy crisis came in '73, there was a crash of the American industry vis-à-vis the Japanese, who were developing fuel-efficient cars with better road handling qualities and so forth. So short-term profits almost brought about the death of the American car industry and brought about a demise which in fact is still lasting. And if you see what makes a profit of the American car industry today, it's still these same gas guzzlers. They are now called sport utes, but it's still the same gas guzzlers you had in the 60s. Having a long-term vision means investing in R&D massively, and not just in packaging existing technology. It means developing cooperations between manufacturers and between manufacturers and tier 1 or tier 2 suppliers. It means the ability to work with startups, which is not a natural thing for a large company. Normally, large companies tend to buy startups, and once they have bought them, they are not startups anymore, and they are destroyed, I would say dissolved into the company and lose their own particular strengths. And another point is the lobbying of the car industry. The lobbying of the car industry in every country in the world tends, and I participated in this lobbying with a lack of enthusiasm, but I was a minority of one among any group of colleagues, tends to preserve the existing situation. Please don't make the emission controls more difficult to meet. Please don't force us to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Please don't force us to address pedestrian safety. Please don't force us to, because that goes against our profits. I believe, yes, it does go against short-term profits, but it's a condition of survival. If you do not address emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, safety for not only the passenger of the car, but for the pedestrian, the bicycles, etc., you are fighting against the future, the long-term future of the car industry. Okay, last point. I believe that as you are competing with companies, even if you cooperate with them, you should not give one region or one country a monopoly when this country has manufacturers and which are your competitors, which means that I'm a strong believer, for example, in having a European battery manufacturing capacity and engineering and R&D force. So the first thing is having a long-term vision. The second thing is preserving the ability of manufacturers, OEM, as integrators. When Louis Renault, who founded the Renault company, was head of Renault in the first half of the 20th century, he felt that he should manufacture and control 100% of the cost base of his products, which means, of course, he bought steel mills. He even bought, because at the time you used wood extensively, he bought forests. He made his own headlights, his own tires, etc., etc. And of course, this was completely inefficient. And from this time on, almost all manufacturers have become integrators. That is, 80% of the cost, manufacturing cost of a car is bought out. And I think this is a good evolution. But the manufacturers retain the know-how of an integrator. That is, the handling, the feel, etc. of the car. And this gave power to the OEM, the final manufacturer. But if you look at an electric car, you see that this know-how is much less important. I mean, vibrations, road handling for an autonomous car, it's not an issue. Noise is not an issue. An electric engine, as I said, an electric powertrain, is not something which integrates a level of know-how you have in a gasoline or a diesel engine. Driving pleasure, of course, will have disappeared. And if you look at BMW's slogan, well, it's a driving pleasure, which is the driver of the brand. So the know-how, which is less important, means that the barriers to entry as an OEM are disappearing, because it takes 10 to 20 years, and I have witnessed it. It took 20 years for BMW to be at the same standard as Mercedes. They do not have exactly the same know-how. But to be at the same standard, it took BMW 20 years. Audi, which started later, also took 20 years to catch up with BMW. And I still remember in the 90s, people from BMW and Mercedes saying, Audi will never be accepted as a car at our level. Yes, it took 20 years. So that means there were long barriers to entry. These, because of the evolution, autonomous car, electric cars, these barriers will very much disappear. And we see new manufacturers appearing. Lastly, on this barrier to entry, for many, many years, the OEMs were financially the most powerful in the field. GM was stronger than any supplier. Today, if you look at the financial capacity, the market cap of an OEM vis-a-vis a Google, a Tesla, whatever, it's ridiculous. I mean, if Google decided to buy GM, they could do it tomorrow morning. So the barriers which make the car manufacturers feel that they were a small, elite, protected group have disappeared. So, lastly, one should define a framework for the level 5 autonomous car. And this is not something so easy, and I will dwell a bit on this. First, you have to accept the idea that there will never be a world with only autonomous cars communicating among themselves. That would be nice, but it won't happen. It won't happen because, of course, you will always have pedestrians, you will always have motor-driven or human-driven scooters or motorcycles or bicycles and so forth. And in all foreseeable future, you will have driver-driven cars because one will sell traditional cars, I believe, still in 2040, 2050. A car lives for 15 years, and people in less rich countries will still buy the cheapest available car, and this car will not be an autonomous car. Therefore, one cannot, I might say, assume a future with autonomous cars living among themselves and therefore being in a well-known, secure environment. That's point one. Point two, as a difficulty, is the relation with infrastructure. When you speak to developers of autonomous cars, they say you should have a system of signaling, lines on the road, etc., etc. This will not always be the case. And they also assume that the telecom system will work at all times perfectly well. For all of us who use a mobile phone, we know that this is not absolutely the case at any time, anywhere. And a car is supposed to go anytime, anywhere. So the infrastructure issue, be it the infrastructure, the road infrastructure, or the telecom infrastructure, is, in my view, a major, major issue. You can assume that for level 4, it is less of an issue because there, on level 4, you use only where you have the good infrastructure. But you still have responsibility issues because even, let's say, on a divided highway, you find zones where telecoms are not what they should be. So, addressing the issue, I would say, of not being able to rely on a very efficient, reliable, at all times, infrastructure is one of the challenges of the autonomous vehicle, be it of level 4 or level 5. Third point is cybersecurity. If you tell somebody, okay, you will have a driverless car, but you know, somebody may take control of your car and do with your cars what you would not wish to do yourself, it's ghastly. I think it is the most frightening thing for a car owner. And if you read technical literature, cybersecurity, you feel, is something where you have the cop on the one hand, the robber on the other hand, and it's an ongoing fight. And nobody ever wins the fight. I mean, sometimes one goes a bit ahead of the other, another time the other goes a bit ahead of one. With a driverless car and unsecure cybersecurity, you're blocked. So I think it is much more an issue. I mean, if somebody takes control of my computer, okay, this costs some money, and this is a major issue for a company, etc., etc. But if you're in a car on a highway, there is zero tolerance. And I believe this is an issue. It is, in my mind, the only issue which makes me less certain that the fully autonomous car will be sold to an individual. Another issue is driving rules, codes. We have European codes, not the same in any country. Even in one country, like France, you do not have the same rules applying everywhere. And a car which is autonomous may find it difficult to know specific rules. And specifically in the case of where the rules are not followed by normal drivers. And I'll also give you a small example. You may know that La Place de l'Étoile in Paris has all, how do you say rond-point? Circles, roundabouts. As you know, in Paris, in a roundabout everywhere in France, the people on the roundabout have priority on the people coming in. Okay, in Paris, this is not the case. It's the reverse. People coming in have priority on the people being in. Now, I don't know if you have ever driven on the Place de l'Étoile, but if you follow the rules, which means the people coming in have priority on the people being in the Place de l'Étoile, the car which follows the rule will go to the Place de l'Étoile, then stop, because at all times it will see people coming onto the right. And therefore, a wager which was made by an important supplier of having a car able to cross the Place de l'Étoile at peak hour. He gave up. He gave up. He could drive everywhere in France. His driverless car functioned perfectly on Place de l'Étoile, even with having somebody sitting beside, of course, ready to take the controls. It could never cross the Place de l'Étoile. And on the other hand, nobody can write in a program controlling a car, you will not at all times follow the rules given by public authorities, because that would be taking an unacceptable responsibility by the person doing the programming. Who can say, look, try to be intelligent and don't follow the rules? Now, suppose there's an accident. Suppose there's a judge in charge of the accident. And suppose he finds that the program of the autonomous cars says you do not have, in all cases, to respect the rules set out by the public authority. It would cost hundreds of millions. So this is a tricky issue, and of course, rules have been to be worldwide. Last issue is responsibility. Now, as I said, people accept the fact that there are human errors, and people accept that if there is a human error, there will be an insurance, but that the price to pay will not be crazy. One sees in the US that if the responsibility of the manufacturer is involved, and also one sees it in Europe, there the legal costs, the torts, explode. I don't believe it would be socially acceptable to set a limit on what damages a victim of an autonomous car can collect. It's not reasonable, it's not feasible, it won't happen. Therefore, as I said, you should have extra safety, but there are a number of issues to address. First, you have to have, of course, a very reliable black box, the so-called black box in every car. Not a simple one, something which is very reliable to find out what responsibility is engaged, what really happened. Specifically, if a human person can take over the controls. If you don't have full knowledge within a black box, it won't work. Secondly, if you put in your programs deep learning, you are at risk, because you do not know if your car is still following the rules. It might want to be intelligent. It might want to cross the Place de l'Étoile instead of waiting. It might want to join a divided highway at peak hours, and you know that the rule is that the people joining the highway should always cede priority to people on the highway. But you also know that at peak hours, that means you sit and don't move, and you will never join the highway. So if your car wants to be intelligent, it means it might think the rules are stupid. And if it thinks the rules are stupid, the issue of responsibility, if there is an accident, is tragic. So what I'm saying is that, fortunately, we have some time, but there has to be a major effort developed on the rules for the driverless car. In France, there's an organization called the Club des Juristes, which tries to devise rules, and they have set up a group, including manufacturers, OEMs, suppliers, legal experts, artificial intelligence experts and so forth. I happen to chair this group. We have set ourselves a program for 1 year's work. I'm not quite sure we will have finished our recommendations in 1 year, and then to enforce the recommendations worldwide might take also some time. So, it's an exciting revolution, but as in all revolutions, you don't know how it will end. Thank you.